Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Blinded by Science. I'm your host, Anthony Nanfito. On today's episode, we'll be discussing the book Numbers Don't Lie by Vaclav Smil. I'll share my initial impressions, the pros and cons, and some surprising facts. For example, did you know that the combustion engine is older than bicycles? Yeah. I didn't know that. It's pretty crazy. So we'll dive into that in this episode. In future episodes, I will be taking a deeper dive into selected chapters from the book. If you want to read the book and follow along, check out the link in the description. Please note this is an affiliate link with Amazon and I receive a commission at no extra cost to you. Purchasing this link helps support me and the show, so I appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right, before we begin, a few quick announcements. I want to give a shout out and thanks to my Buy Me a Coffee supporters. You all are awesome. If you're noticing a little bit different sound, I'm recording a video episode of this podcast. And as a member of my Buy Me a Coffee page, you get access to the ad-free video version of Blinded by Science episodes. You can join at buymeacoffee.com/wordsbyfifi. Special shout out to my mom, Connie, for being my #1 supporter and joining my Buy Me a Coffee membership. Love you, Mom. All right, that's it for today's announcement. Let's get on to the show, but first, a word from our sponsor. Welcome to Blinded by Science, a podcast appreciating all things science. I'm your host, Anthony Nanfito, sci-fi writer and educator. But for this podcast, you can think of me as your science ambassador. I'm fascinated with the scientific process, the knowledge it reveals to us, and I want to share my appreciation of it with the world. Now, let's get to the science. Okay, welcome to episode 7 of Blinded by Science. Today on the show, I'll be taking a different approach and review a science book I read recently. The book is called Numbers Don't Lie, and it is written by Vaclav Smil. Before we get started, I'll read the quick bio about Professor Smil, so that you have an idea of who he is. All right, about the author. Vaclav Smil is Distinguished Professor Emeritus at the University of Manitoba. He is the author of over 40 books on topics including energy, environmental and population change, food production and nutrition, technical innovation, risk assessment, and public policy. He is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada and a member of the Order of Canada. All right, so that's a quick overview of Professor Smil, a little background on him. Obviously, he's very knowledgeable about these topics, and I was impressed with his book. So let's go ahead and start with my initial impressions. The subtitle of the book is 71 Things You Need to Know About the World. And each chapter in the book is an essay written by Smil that breaks down a lot of the numbers and statistics we often see highlighted in the media. Smil takes these and provides a deeper and wider context to better understand what these numbers mean. I particularly enjoyed this because a lot of what we see in the news or other media outlets is, in my opinion, clickbait. It's about getting the views, whether it is traditional television or more modern platforms such as YouTube, Instagram, or other social media. Remember, as a viewer, we have to remind ourselves that all of these platforms, even traditional media, are powered by advertising. So the more views they can get, the more views they'll have for advertisements. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with this business model, and I'm not saying that if businesses or corporations or news outlets use this model that they're evil. But I think what we have to remember is that when we're dealing with sharing information and educating the public, that this can create conflicts of interest and it can dilute your purpose. So you as a media organization, are you more worried about getting the views or reporting and giving an accurate understanding of the world? And in my opinion, I think with the internet and the social media, we're leaning more towards sharing stuff that maybe isn't necessarily going to be an in-depth overview of things. It's more about getting you to have an emotional reaction so that you click and share it. Whereas I think what we really need is to have the best possible analysis of something, which is frankly what books are able to do because you've got all these pages right here, right? So you can go in more depth. Obviously, certain news media and other forms of media don't lend themselves to that. So we definitely need to find a balance. So this is something to keep in mind as we navigate this increasingly complex and nuanced world we live in. And hence, the goal of this podcast is not just to appreciate science, but to use it to better understand our world. Further, a single number or statistic doesn't always tell the full story. I know as humans, we love things to be simplified and boiled down to their raw essence. But the world doesn't work that way. It is much more nuanced and complex. And this is what I think Smil aims to do with the book Numbers Don't Lie. He shows us that the world is not always black and white. Context and history matters when we look at what data is telling us. And to better understand our world, we need to take a deeper and wider dive into what it's telling us, into what this data is telling us, so that we can better understand our world and not blindly follow or get misguided by quotes in the headlines or from news pundits or politicians or your friends on social media. We can have a better, deeper understanding. My initial impression of the book is that it is quick, easily digestible, and great for getting a more contextualized view of the numbers we encounter in today's modern digital age. The 71 topics are short essays, usually a page or two long. They are mostly disjoint topics, so you don't have to read it all in one sitting for everything to kind of make sense. You can pick it up, read an essay or two, and then put it down and come back to it whenever you want to. That said, I appreciated the briefness or brevity of these essays. I also felt these short and easy to read essays in each chapter were also missing an in-depth look at some of the topics. Sometimes I felt they were a little surface level, but I should note that he does have other books, as we heard about in the About the Author section. So, and I haven't read those, and I think they probably go into more in-depth look. For example, one section in this book is about food. Well, he has whole books on food and nutrition, so I can read those if I want to get a more in-depth look. And in fact, he has a section in the back that is, suggestions for further reading. So I think this book, with all that said, this book covers a wide variety of topics around people, machines, fuel, transport, food, and environment. Because of that, I don't think the aim of this book is to give an in-depth look, but rather to give the reader a broader view of the context behind the numbers from data, statistics, and headlines. And for this, I'm grateful because it's given me a better understanding, but it's also left me more curious and wanting more. As such, I have selected several chapters from this book to be the focus of future episodes, where we can take a more in-depth look at these topics. To give you a preview, here are 7 surprising things I learned after reading this book. In no particular order, here's the list. So number 1, most of our modern world was built in the 1800s. And by that, Smil describes the technology that was originally created in the 1800s and certainly has improved since then. But he points out that we haven't made as many significant technological leaps or created as many new inventions and technology as were created in the 1800s. And the story he gives is of a woman going to work and she drinks her coffee, an instant coffee, which was created by Maxwell House in the 1800s. She drives a car to work, which is a combustion engine, invented in the 1800s. She writes some notes during a meeting using a ballpoint pen, which was invented in the 1800s. The point with all these examples, and the more he gives in the book, is we have all this wonderful technology. It's great. We've improved upon it, but there's very few examples where we've made significant technological leaps, especially when you compare how we lived in the 1700s to compared to how we lived in the 1800s and after. So I thought that was really interesting because I think it's something that we can forget in this modern world we live in. Next, number two, the GDP or gross domestic product is often cited as the primary metric for a country's quality of life and overall economic health. But Smil argues that infant mortality is a better indicator of a country's quality of life and economic health, which I think is an interesting thing to look at. And infant mortality is measuring basically the survivability of infants that are born each year. How many are surviving? How many are going on to become adults? And also related to that is the mother. You know, how many mothers are dying in childbirth or because of pregnancy, which is another thing to think about too. And we'll take a deeper dive into that as well. Number three, the best return on investment is vaccines. Yeah, it's not big corporate bailouts. It's not, government stimulus packages. It's not, infrastructure packages. While those definitely can be helpful to help an economy recover and get better at things, really what you want to invest in is the health of the people in your society. And one very powerful way to do that is with vaccines. And we've seen that with examples like the polio virus, which is pretty much eradicated and not causing as much problems as it did 100, 200 years ago. And we're seeing that with other diseases like measles and that kind of thing. And we've seen it this past year with COVID-19. We saw firsthand, every single human on this planet, what a disease can do to completely just ravage our economies, tear apart our societies, and really show us that we are still at the whim of Mother Nature. And quite frankly, COVID-19, as devastating as it was, it's not as bad as some of the other diseases out there like Ebola or the Zika virus. So my point here is vaccines can provide a lot of good and health, not just to our own individual bodies, but to our society and to our economy and everything else that represents or is part of our modern civilization. So we'll take a look at that and what Smil has to say with that in another episode. Next up, number four, technological progress is much slower than we think it is, which is why which is partially why we're still waiting for fully electric cars. Yeah, I know they're out there. Shout out to Tesla and others that are making them, but it's not widespread and it's taken a long time to get them. There's also no flying cars. I'm looking out the window right now. It's a clear, partly cloudy blue sky, no flying cars. Not like the Jetsons. I'm just saying, I watched the Jetsons as a kid. Where are my flying cars? Or hoverboards, shout out to Back to the Future, like where are those hoverboards at? So the point here is technology progresses much slower than we think it should, especially when we have, devices like our smartphones and tablets and whatnot. We feel like, oh, why isn't this possible? Or, some people will joke, well, if we can put a man on the moon, why can't we do, So my point is here is technology progresses slower than we think it should. Anyways, moving on to number five. The combustion engine is older than bicycles. This is the one I mentioned earlier in the episode. And it has to do with the design. So I'm sure we've all seen those pictures of early bicycles that had the giant front wheel and the small back wheel, and you had to sit like on top of it. And I never really thought about this until I read the book, but it's like, how do you get on top of that wheel? Like the diameter of it was like, it looked like 10 feet. It was taller than a person, and here's this guy sitting on top of it, riding it. So that's part of the things that changed. And then obviously the other thing that I didn't think about is modern day bicycle tires are inflated. We have an inner tube inside of it. We fill it with air. And what that does is make the ride more comfortable. Before that, the tires were solid rubber. And one, It's uncomfortable to ride. It's more challenging to make. The process that they used to create those tires, so it didn't allow for like mass production, and it was expensive. So all these kind of things contributed to bicycles not really taking off in their more modern design until a little later. And we'll get into that in another episode too. Number 6, humans like to think of this as our planet, which in my opinion is a little self-centered, I think is the word, right? I don't know if you've looked out the window or been on a nature walk recently, but we're not the only ones on this planet. And what he points out is if you were an extraterrestrial alien, observing Earth using some sort of telescope or maybe some probes or something, discreetly so that the natives don't see. If you were to observe, you would observe that human mass, so the mass of humans collectively, is significantly less than, say, something like cows. And in fact, that's, if you look at the cover a little closely, he's got the cows sitting on top of Earth on this particular cover design. And so what we see from that is if you're looking at Earth, you wouldn't necessarily recognize that, oh, there's Homo sapiens, these bipedal apes that walk around and create cars and bridges and buildings. They're the species that is most prevalent here. And that's just looking at cows. And that's because cows are bigger than humans. They take up more space than humans. That doesn't account for other animals and plant life, or even considering smaller things like insects and bacterial life. So I thought that was an interesting thing because it does remind us that, like, hey, we're not the only ones here, right? And number 7, lastly, plane crashes are terrifying and tragic, yet they are extremely rare. And this makes flying one of the most safest modes, if not the safest mode of transportation. And I think this is amazing because consider what would happen or what would have happened if we never perfected flying, if we never made it as safe as it is today. How would our world be different if we were still having to use slower modes of transportation like trains, or steam engines across the Atlantic or the Pacific? How would that have changed how our society is built? How would that change not just things like travel, but transporting goods and things like that? So again, I think all of these are fascinating. I think they're interesting because some of them we take for granted and we don't realize that it's really there until we stop and kind of look, like I said earlier, at the context and the history. It's not just enough to say that, 0.001% of X happens per year. It's like, well, why? In the case of the plane crashes, we have so few plane crashes per year. Well, why is that? And we have to go back and look at the context and the history to fully understand that. So, as I said, we're going to take a deeper dive into these topics in future episodes. If you want to read the book and follow along, you can check out the link in the description. Again, note, this is an affiliate link with Amazon, and I receive a commission at no cost to you. And so purchasing with this link helps support me and the show. All right, that is it for this special book review episode of Blinded by Science. If there are other science books you want me to review, send an email to blindedbysciencepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening, and check your feeds for the next episode. Thanks for listening to this episode of Blinded by Science. This podcast was written and produced by yours truly, Anthony Nanfito. The theme song is Crimson Fly by Huma Huma. The logo was designed by myself using the app Over with image credit to nasa.gov. If you liked what you heard, subscribe to the podcast on Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Creators like me work hard to create content you love. But in order to continue creating content, we need support from followers like you. If you're enjoying the show and want more episodes, you can support the show financially at buymeacoffee.com/wordsbyfifi. Contributions can be one-time, monthly, or yearly. Visit buymeacoffee.com/wordsbyfifi to learn more. You can keep up with the podcast on Twitter at BBSPod, on Instagram at Blinded by Science Podcast, or on the website blindedbysciencepodcast.wordpress.com. Until next time, thanks for listening and stay curious.